Nothing annoys me more than young people constantly complaining that they're never going to be able to afford property in the UK. They're always like, oh, there's no affordable housing. Well, this is proof that there is. 5-bed detached property in Wiltshire, 310,000. Now, the dining room is an absolute peaceful retreat, perfect for a young family looking to get onto the property ladder. £310,000 for this is an absolute bargain because, as you can see, what you see is what you get. All of the fixtures and fittings are included. Gorgeous little property. Absolutely love what they've done with the place. Slowly moving on to the kitchen, rugged and raw effect like most millennials like these days. Kitchen counters, all the cabinets and the flooring is still intact, as you can see. Absolutely love what they've done with the master bedroom. Perfect for a night's sleep. You could even get your children in this one, maybe get a bunk bed in there. And young people are always like, oh, there's nothing good on the market, can't afford it. Well, this is proof, people. You could move in straight away and wouldn't even need to renovate a thing. Here we got another one of the bedrooms. I imagine this could be a children's bedroom. Again, you could move straight in. And all of the fixtures and fittings are included. Beautiful bathroom and absolute great condition. Now, I want to see what you guys think about it. For me, it really does annoy me when people are saying, you know, there's no quality housing in the UK. This is proof that there is quality, affordable housing in the UK. Let me know what you think.
Hi guys, my name is Natalie, aka DJ Envy, aka Scatterly 2.0, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So I decided to record this today since a lot has been happening over the last 24 hours. Since yesterday this has happened.
These proposals will also seek to safeguard its impartiality and core values, to enhance trust and confidence in the institutions of government. My government will bring forward a bill to speed up remediation for people living in homes with unsafe cladding and a draft bill to ban abusive conversion practices. This will include housing, which can be a source of insecurity for many people. My ministers will bring forward legislation to increase long-term investment in social housing and to reform the leasehold system, including the capping of ground rents.
And then this was followed on by this response.
There is some extraordinary cognitive dissonance, isn't there, in the King, talking about housing crises and poverty in 2026 in the United Kingdom. And I don't want you to think I'm unaware of it. And or that I'm unanimated by it. There's something a little bit unseemly almost about it. The idea that someone can be delivering a speech addressing poverty and housing crises when they own countless properties. One of the biggest landlords in the country, isn't he? But I mean, the properties that are for his own use are innumerable as well. And poverty, while he's wearing jewellery that you could probably house 100 homeless people simply by flogging down pawnbrokers today. I just mentioning it. I'm not unaware of it. But
so keeping to the themes of the prior YouTube videos which have been uploaded on my YouTube channel, I have entitled this video, Billionaires Row is Run by Slum Landlords. It will all make sense in a moment. If you are here and if you're new, thank you very much for joining me on this tiny little corner of the internet on this gargantuan platform. If you have already subscribed, thank you so much for smashing that subscribe button. Don't forget to do that if you haven't done so already. Don't forget to hit the like button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. And share this with your friends, your family, or your frenemy at work, because this has got something to do with a really hot topic at the moment, and this is to do with the housing crisis, specifically in London. The street is worth nearly over £350 million, but nobody lives there. The Bishop's Avenue, North London, 66 mansions. Multiple of these mansions are sitting empty, some of them for decades. They are boarded up windows, peeling paint, overgrown driveways, broken windows, broken gates, and properties worth millions, functioning as nothing more than abandoned financial assets. And about 4 miles south of Bishop's Avenue in Soho, Regent Street, New Bond Street, Marble Arch, Park Street, Park Lane, Piccadilly Circus, outside these designer stores and luxury apartments, people are sleeping in tents. The contrast is not a coincidence. It's a direct result of a deliberate system, one where housing in London stopped being somewhere to live and started being somewhere to park money. Today we are going to walk through exactly that and how it happened. The ghost homes, the offshore investors, the political failures, the ordinary people paying the price, and what, if anything, might change. Infamous Bishop's Avenue runs about a mile between Hampstead Heath and Highgate in North London. It's been nicknamed Billionaires Row, and for a good reason. The properties here have been owned over the decades by oil barons, newspaper tycoons, Middle Eastern royalty, and some of the wealthiest families on the planet. What makes it genuinely surreal? Many of these properties are in a state of serious disrepair. There are some which are not, they are maintained, they are guarded by security teams, or they have been purchased quite recently since the buildings have been constructed. But there are others which are in serious disrepair. We are talking about boarded up windows, peeling paint, gardens that haven't been touched in years, buildings that look from the outside completely abandoned. One of the local residents reported that only 3 homes on the entire street were lived in full time. A 2014 Guardian investigation found that 16 properties on one of London's ultra-prime streets were effectively derelict. Some were unoccupied for several decades. One local resident told reporters that only 3 homes on the entire road were lived in full time. So why would someone worth hundreds of millions of pounds buy a mansion and just leave it to rot? So many of these homes were purchased in the 1980s or the 1990s, often through offshore companies. The buyers weren't buying somewhere to live, they were buying a store of value like gold, but with a prestigious London postcode attached. So the calculation goes like this. London is politically stable. The legal systems protects the property rights. Values have historically increased, and the city has got global prestige. So buying a mansion here, even if you never visit, is simply a very reliable way to protect and grow significant wealth. Some owners were reportedly waiting for land values to increase further before selling or developing. Others simply had so many properties around the world or in the country that one wasn't even worth thinking about. So buy it, set it, and forget it, right? And in some cases, complex ownership structures, such as with multi-layers of offshore companies, meant that it wasn't even clear who actually owned the building. So, for instance, let's take the example of Oak Lodge on Bishop's Avenue. It suffered significant fire damage and then sat undeveloped for over 30 years. That's 30 years in one of the most expensive streets in the world. There's currently a proposal to convert some of these vacant sites into up to 300 affordable homes. Whether that actually happens sooner or later is up for debate. But the fact that we're even talking about something like this just shows how conflicting the conversation has become. And more recently, in 2026, reports have emerged that elite investors, some reportedly linked to the Iranian regime, hold multiple now empty mansions in the area worth roughly around £100 million combined. The properties sit vacant. The neighbourhood, already ghostly, becomes quieter. Critics have called it a ghost town phenomenon, and it is an accurate description. Vast amounts of capital, enormous physical assets, and effectively zero human activity. The investigation into Bishop's Avenue has become symbolic of something much larger than we initially realised. The idea that parts of prime central London were no longer functioning as neighbourhoods at all, they were functioning as financial vaults. And that's where the story really gets interesting, because the Bishop's Avenue is just the most visible example. This is happening across the entire City of London.
London has the most expensive rent per square metre in all of Europe. It often leaves the city's workers with a Hobson's choice between space and 2-hour commutes, which average at £5,102 a year. Cesar Mendez is 47 and a bank administrator. He's opted for the former.
Wow. Have you seen a smaller flat than this?
No, I haven't. I think this might be the smallest flat in London.
Apparently this place used to be a caretaker's cupboard. So I think it was bought in the year 2000, then they refurbished it into a tiny flat. I've been here for nearly 5 years, so there was a lot of previous tenants before here. Yeah, I think the rent is crazy in London. I believe it's because there's no more space to build new houses and accommodation, but I think it's crazy because a lot of people don't have anywhere to live, People are still living with their parents until they are 35. So it is insane because half of my wages go into rent. It doesn't give you, don't have much money left to do other stuff. I'm gonna show you my tiny bathroom in my tiny flat. Sink, a little window there, the shower. That's all.
This flat was just on the market. Do you know how much it went for on the market?
At the beginning, it was for 250. I think it went for £200,000.
Wow, £200,000 for 11 square feet.
Yes.
That's
I think it's because of the location. In winter, it's a bit harder because also it's a bit cooler in town, and it rains a lot and it's very cold. So I spend more time in winter, and then in winter you feel more trapped in this space. It's cozy, no? The ceiling is just here, so it seems a bit claustrophobic for some people. Say, oh, how can you sleep there, where the ceiling is very close to you? But for me, is normal.
The contrast tells you almost something about the modern UK housing market. From roughly 2010 onwards, London property stopped being just about housing and it became a global financial asset. For overseas millionaires and billionaires from Russia, the Gulf state, China, Nigeria, the US and other global destinations, buying property in Kensington, Chelsea, Knightsbridge or Belgravia became less about actually living there and more about protecting wealth, of storing money in a Swiss bank account, prestigious, politically stable and likely to increase in value. And that is exactly what has happened. Between 2010 and 2022, average London property prices exploded from roughly £300,000 to over £500,000. In the most exclusive boroughs, homes worth 20 million, 50 million or even £100 million became increasingly common. Entire luxury apartment blocks were being marketed in Hong Kong, Singapore and Dubai before ordinary Londoners even knew they existed, and sold off-plan before anybody else even knew about it. Not as homes, but as investment products. Critics call these properties and these developments ghost homes. Dark apartments with lights which are never turned on because the property itself is functioning as a storage for wealth, not somewhere to raise a family. And while those apartments sit empty overlooking Hyde Park, the consequences ripple downwards through every level of the housing market. When the top end of the market is inflated by global capital that has got nothing to do with local wages or local need, it pushes prices up across the board. And those who feel it most are the people at the bottom of the pyramid.
I think in life you have to prioritize what you want to do, because before I used to travel a lot because I had to pay less rent, so now I pay more rent by travel less, but I'm happier now, so it's nice to live on your own. I think there is a crisis in London in terms of accommodation. It's like insane. So many people are still living with their parents because they cannot afford to buy a flat. Also, all the prices go up every year with inflation and everything. But so I think they have to do something. But a lot of, and also most of these flats in this area are owned by people from abroad. So that shouldn't be the case, because a lot of people in London don't have anything to live, and it's a very speculative market in terms of selling and buying flats in especially in London, because everything is so expensive here. I think in this area you cannot find a studio flat for less than £500,000.
Well, particularly Kensington and Chelsea, it's one of the richest boroughs in London.
But also if you move further out, you can find something, but in the region of £300,000. So, and especially for a single person is more difficult, because the bank only give you 4.5 times your salary. So sometimes single people cannot afford to buy a flat. So if you have a partner, then it's easier because then you have two salaries. But if you are on your own, I think it's more complicated, more challenging, right? Even if this is a less than 12 meter flat, for me is my home. I'm happy here. I've been living here for the last 5 years. So, and also when you have a small place, it's easier to clean it as well because it's very small. So, and also most of the time I'm outside with friends or running or working, so you don't spend much time in your flat anyway. But some people prefer to have bigger homes and then or have a garden. But my garden is high park, so I can't complain.
Nurses, teachers, creatives, hospitality workers, entry-level workers, people who run and essentially provide the operational services to the city. Property guardianship, gentrified squatting, which has become increasingly common, young professionals paying to live in abandoned hospitals and care homes or former schools and empty pubs, who are guarding buildings from vandalism while developers waited for the values to increase even further, or the developers are waiting for planning permission to be authorised by the local authorities. Others have moved onto houseboats, turning London's canals into floating neighbourhoods. It's now, for many people, simply an economic survival. These aren't lifestyle choices. These are symptoms of a system that is completely broken down for people who actually make the city function.
Right to buy. I mean, that is the bane of my life. I think it is the most devastating housing policy that was possibly introduced under the guise of helping working class people to get onto the property ladder. If you look at the number of homes sold under right to buy that has now fallen into the private rented sector, it's astonishing how many homes we have lost under right to buy since it was introduced in the 1980s. And people ask me, was the right to buy a success? No, it was an absolute failure. The reason being is under right to buy, it was promised that for the homes that were sold off, they would be replaced. That never happened. Automatically, in my eyes, that policy was a failure. And people say, well, they were trying to help working class people. I don't think that was the case. I think they were trying to get rid of social housing and wanted to do that by introducing the right to buy scheme. But when people say that, I ask them, at the expense of who? At the expense of 1.3 million households, working class households, now stuck on waiting lists across the country, 172,000 homeless kids who will probably spend their entire childhood homeless or in emergency accommodation, often slum conditions. Is that the success that they're talking about? Because that is the reality as a result of the introduction of the right to buy scheme. And I fundamentally do believe that they would have understood that if they didn't, alongside the right to buy scheme, replace those homes, we would further down the line end up in a situation like this. But by that point, they're no longer in government and therefore it's not their problem anymore. And it's not just Margaret Thatcher. There's been consecutive governments, Labour and Conservative governments, who have failed to address this issue, have failed to give council and social housing the respect it deserves, who have failed to admit that it's one of the biggest ways that we're going to get out of the housing crisis that we have faced. And they have been incredibly underwhelming with that. So it's not just we blame one. There is a whole host of reasons as to why we've ended up where we are now. But often you can trace it back to the introduction of the Right to Buy scheme and the Housing Act of 1988.
Councils themselves who are still using Section 21s with different loopholes. What do you still think are the biggest gaps in terms of rights for private renters?
I don't think enough's been done with estate agents, and we haven't really spotlighted just how much of a problem they have become in terms of the misery that renters are facing. But I also believe they've become a problem for landlords too, because often they act as the middleman and fail to communicate between the two, right, but are happy to collect money off of the back of it. In terms of renters' rights, there was a point that I wanted to mention, and that was the affordability issue in the private rented sector. Yeah. That is a massive reason as to why we have the levels of homelessness that we are facing at the moment. Yes, we had Section 21, and I'm glad to see the back of that. But the big elephant in the room is the affordability crisis in the private rented sector, and people really, really struggling, in some cases paying the majority of their income per month to their private landlord. And in many cases, the conditions of their homes are shambolic. something has to be done about it. And people don't like the term rent control or rent stabilisation. What I am fundamentally clear on is something, in order to tackle this housing crisis, something has to be done to address the affordability crisis in the private rented sector.
And so I am calling for rent controls.
Yeah.
I don't know if, I know on some positions you probably stay neutral in terms of you go, I just want things to get sorted. Do you have a position on rent controls or...
In terms of rent controls, I mean, as I said, something has to be done to address the affordability crisis in the private rented sector. Rent controls, people will often ask, well, what does that look like? And I think it's important to actually create a model which fundamentally works. I think a big problem that I see online often is people talk about, well, if we introduced rent controls, would that then mean that landlords are leaving at a rapid pace and therefore people become homeless off of the back of that and then have to turn to local authorities that don't have council housing? So we have to address the issues where, I guess, with rent controls, rents are fair, but in the long and short term, it doesn't end up having the sort of impact that we don't want, and that is driving people towards homelessness. But with rent controls, people panic when they hear it. There are some other countries that have had rent controls or rent stabilisation to address unaffordable rents, specifically with private housing. You can look at New York City, for example. You can look at Berlin. I think in 2020, they introduced that. Scotland, I think, and I know there was issues with all of these. I mean, none of these models were perfect, but what was shown was a willingness to address the elephant in the room, and that is millions of people are struggling, really struggling to pay their rent on a monthly basis because they keep receiving rent hikes, which is completely unfair. And I think a fair point to make is if landlords were going through that situation where it was reversed and they were receiving rent hikes, living in poor conditions, for example, having to choose whether they're going to put clothes on their kids' back, feed themselves, or pay the rent at the end of the month, they would think it's completely fair. So I like to believe in treating people how you would like to be treated. And I think that the same should apply when it comes to renting. Whether we call it rent control or we call it something else, I don't care. What I do care about, though, is people not having to pay the majority of their income on a monthly basis to their landlords. Otherwise, we're going to see more and more pressure being piled onto local authorities who simply do not have the resources, the money, or the homes to deal with it.
While there are empty penthouses overlooking Hyde Park, homelessness in London has become central to this argument, and it's become impossible to ignore. Rough sleepers in tents around Marble Arch, Soho, Oxford Street, Westminster, and Park Lane are now part of the city's daily landscape. The contrast is surreal, and it's not accidental. Designer stores on the ground floor, tents outside, luxury boutiques on street level, empty apartments upstairs, and homelessness and rough sleeping on the pavements. Homelessness is only one dimension of this crisis. For many people who do have a roof over their heads, the conditions inside that roof are a crisis of its own. In 2022, a 2-year-old boy named Awab Ishaq died after prolonged exposure to mould in social housing. He was only 2 years old. He died because of the conditions of his home he was living in. His death was extremely shocking, and it sent shockwaves up and down the country. And it forced in legislation to landlords to address dangerous conditions like damp, mould within strict legal timeframes. It forced a national conversation about the condition of Britain's rental housing stock, particularly social housing, and exposed severe systemic failings in how landlords and housing associations were managing their properties.
Nothing annoys me more than young people constantly complaining that they're never going to be able to afford property in the UK. They're always like, oh, there's no affordable housing. Well, this is proof that there is. 5-bed detached property in Wiltshire, 310,000. Now, the dining room is an absolute peaceful retreat, perfect for a young family looking to get onto the property ladder. £310,000 for this is an absolute bargain because, as you can see, what you see is what you get. All of the fixtures and fittings are included. Gorgeous little property. Absolutely love what they've done with the place. Slowly moving on to the kitchen, rugged and raw effect like most millennials like these days. Kitchen counters, all the cabinets and the flooring is still intact, as you can see. Absolutely love what they've done with the master bedroom. Perfect for a night's sleep. You could even get your children in this one, maybe get a bunk bed in there. And young people are always like, oh, there's nothing good on the market, can't afford it. Well, this is proof, people. You could move in straight away and wouldn't even need to renovate a thing. Here we got another one of the bedrooms. I imagine this could be a children's bedroom. Again, you could move straight in. And all of the fixtures and fittings are included, beautiful bathroom, an absolute great condition. Now, I want to see what you guys think about it. For me, it really does annoy me when people are saying, you know, there's no quality housing in the UK. This is proof that there is quality, affordable housing in the UK. Let me know what you think.
And then there's the generational dimension, perhaps the most radically and the most politically charged part of this entire story. For younger people in Britain today, home ownership feels increasingly like something that happened to previous generations, not something available to them if they choose to reside in the UK. Not because they haven't worked hard enough or they haven't saved diligently enough, but because the system has changed fundamentally. If your parents bought a house in London in the 80s or in the 90s, the value of the asset has likely increased by several £100,000. Your wealth grew, but not through labour, not through skill, but by simply through ownership. But then to realise those gains, you do obviously have to sell your property. And that in itself is another dilemma. If your parents bought a house in London in the 1980s or the 1990s, the value of that asset has likely increased by several £100,000. Your wealth grew, not through labour, not through skill, but simply through ownership. If you didn't own property going into this time, if you're a millennial or a Gen Z or just happen to be a renter, you watch that wealth accumulate in other people's pockets. Your rent went up and your savings stayed flat. Housing has become one of the single biggest drivers of intergenerational wealth inequality in Britain. And the people running the country, many of those who own multiple properties, have very little personal incentive to fix it.
One of the traps we really did not want to fall into with this series is talking about Gen Z without talking to them, right? So we polled your audience. 12,000 people responded, 6,000 of them were Gen Zs. So I think let's hear from them, because it is scary out there, and I do worry about the way we are in this click economy. But the voice notes that the Rest is Politics younger listeners have sent in have actually given me a lot of hope, because they are super informed.
I think things are pretty bleak for my generation. You know, we've got a stagnant economy alongside booming markets and asset price inflation, which is great if you've already got wealth, but if you don't have anything, it's pretty shit. Alongside this, underemployment and a lack of entry-level jobs due to the potential of AI to replace them. And these are the exact entry-level jobs that my generation need to get a footing in the job market. So it kind of feels like there's no way for us to get in, you know. And who's on our side out here? It's Gary Stevenson and it's Zach Polanski. The institutions and the institutional voices are failing us.
That was Billy.
Yeah, and I can understand what Billy's saying. And it comes back to my point about this instant sort of, there has to be a quick answer to it. And there has to be a villain. And there has to be a saviour. Whereas actually a lot of these things are more complex than that. But people do feel that the system is rigged against them, and quite rightly so. Because if you're working or you're going to university, you're trying to do everything right to get a good job, to raise a family one day, hopefully, to get your own home, it's almost they feel it's almost impossible, and they're correct to feel that way. If you look at the wages now comparable to mortgage before, it's completely out of reach for most people.
I've done a lot of it. The government has done it. You did it when you were in post. Renters' rights, leasehold reform, but it's still not going to fix this problem we've got where, like in the 90s, when New Labour were in power, you know, the average house price was 3 or 4 times the average wage. Now it's 8 times.
Correct.
And you've got members of Gen Z living in your house. We know that they are more likely to be living with their parents than owning a home of their own, more likely to be able to get onto what we used to call the housing ladder. I don't think that exists anymore, if you've got parents who can help you.
Exactly. Well, wages haven't kept up. If you look at what the average wage is today comparable to what the costs of housing, etc., it's not kept up at all. So the gap's widened, and we've had a supply side problem. This has been built up over a significant period of time. And, you know, you're absolutely right to mention, I've rebalanced some of the challenges that renters face, you know, around challenging rent hikes, that they can only do it annually, and making sure that people can't get no-fault evictions, which is coming in May. So we're doing things and we're making the changes. But the challenge is this has been slowly creeping up for some time. It's not something that is just suddenly happened. And therefore, anyone who says there's just an instant fix to it It's not true. You have to do the hard yards. And that's why I put the Employment Rights Act in place. That's why I put the lease and common hold reforms. That's why I put the Renters' Rights Act in place. That's why we put more money into social and affordable housing than we have done in a very long time. It's why I made the changes to right to buy. It's why I made the change into planning reform, and I took on those that said we shouldn't be building more homes, because we need to start getting on track again. But Gen Z are the generation that feel like, are we going to fall between the gaps? So that's why I was, I took on more legislation than any other Secretary of State. I was in a rush. And I've said it in interviews before, it's like picking between your children. If you said, well, which bit of the hot, decent home standards, the renters or the employment, which bit's the most important? Well, I couldn't pick between them because they all were needed in order to make the change that people needed to feel.
But if we were to talk in detail to the thousands of people who've responded, how much of what you've done and what the government is doing are they even aware of? Now, and I don't know whether that's just a communications issue. I think most people are aware that you've got this very, very ambitious house building goal. I think most people are of the view that it's not going to be met. And therefore, in theory, the planning reform's great. But is it going to happen? We do still have a kind of big NIMBY problem.
Yeah.
And that's playing out all around the country at the moment between people who have, not necessarily, even if they understand it, wanting to see the measures taken.
It is interesting because a lot of the legislation we're talking about that really speaks to some of the issues Billy's feeling, right, in his day-to-day life, they are really complicated acts of parliament, bills that are going through. Leasehold in particular is really, really hard to understand, and it's my main job to try and understand it.
And it's full of minefields. So, for example, me and Michael Gove, the Tory Secretary of State
An unlikely alliance.
An unlikely alliance. We both were at the Select Committee recently touching on the issue of leasehold and the bill that's going through Parliament. And there's a balancing act between trying to ram the legislation through and getting it right so the unintended consequences don't happen, and also around the potential pitfalls of legal challenge for not doing it in the correct way. Now, that doesn't gratify people instantly. It looks like you're making excuses, or it looks like you just don't want to do it. But actually there are some real, as you say, complex issues as to making sure that you get it right and that you're able to deliver for people.
But it's interesting that it's not communicated in that way, right? No one's talking about leasehold as though that's going to help Gen Z, even though it is. Renters' rights, maybe a bit more so, but still not really. Employment rights, we can get to in a minute in detail, but they're not sold as, here are our policies for future. Here's our new deal for young people. Because when we were chatting about those policies, we're like, oh, actually, yeah, they are for young people, but you don't think of it that way.
I don't have any sense from any of the parties. And you mentioned Polanski. I think it's a vibe that people like about him. I think, when we had him sitting there not long ago, and, when you really press him on policy, there's not much there. But
to do.
Well, it is impossible.
Wouldn't necessarily actually be good, but you say it and people are like, oh yeah, I hate my landlord.
Whereas actually some really good landlords out there. I said that when I was bringing in the bill, there are some good landlords out there and we do want them. But the question mark is now is that people can't make an empowered decision. Even when they're working hard, even when they studied hard, they are not empowered to make a decision. Do I want to be a renter? Can I live off what my money is, bearing in mind that most of my wage is going on rent? If I want to be a homeowner, can I have that option to be a homeowner? The generation before me, they chose to be renters if they wanted to be renters. They chose to buy if they wanted to buy. They had a choice. If I'm working, I had a choice to decide what I wanted to be. That choice is completely removed for Gen Z.
Former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt faced significant controversy after it emerged that he had purchased multiple luxury flats in Southampton through a company structure linked to his wife. Questions arose about delayed declarations and allegations surrounding discounts from a Conservative donor. Whether this was intentional or an admin error, the story reinforced a perception that has become almost impossible to shake, that political elites often benefit personally from the very property market that ordinary people are priced out of, that the people writing the housing policy or the rules are the same people profiting from the current system. And this goes right into the middle of why meaningful housing reform is so politically difficult. In Britain, home ownership rates have historically been high enough that a significant portion of the voting public, particularly older voters like boomers or Gen X, who voted at the higher rates have a direct financial incentive and interest in property values remaining very high. Any policy that meaningfully reduces property prices is for them a policy that reduces their wealth.
I'm here for a specific reason. Yeah. I live in a 2-bedroom house, with 5 children, and my missus. With an house come available in my street with 4-bedroom house. What we need, what we're entitled to. They told us that house is reserved for immigrants, and we can't have it on the same council that I've got an house with.
Immigrants?
So, immigrants.
Or asylum seekers?
Immigrants, they said.
Really?
100%.
But that's not legal for them to say that it's...
Well, that's what they said. That's what they think is. So immigrants aren't they? That's what they are. Asylum seekers are immigrants.
I mean, it's a different classification.
How?
Because they've not been given immigration status. It'd be a migrant, I think.
But they're seeking asylum.
Yeah.
Yeah. But do you know when they're seeking asylum, they're also seeking asylum lying, saying that they're gay, saying this and that, so their life's in danger when they're in their country. They're not gay. They're doing it to come over here. That's why there's no women, because women can't do it. Men are saying they're gay and getting into our country. That's why there's no women over there from their countries. It's all men. And the housing is the main reason I'm here today. Main reason, because why are they getting our houses?
And have you been offered any alternative accommodation?
Not at all. We're still in a 2-bedroom house with all our kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
That's all right.
I find it difficult to believe that they said that the house was reserved for immigrants.
Right.
Because that's not a legal, there's no legal basis for that.
Immigrants, asylum seekers, I've same thing.
Yeah.
To me.
How long have you got to wait?
We have to vote. We have to bid. Every time we bid on a property, we're not getting nowhere with it. We have literally been on it now for, how old's my youngest kid? 6. We've been on the housing list for 6 years with 5 children in a 2-bedroom house, bidding every time a 4-bedroom comes available. We're not allowed to bid on a 3 because we've got so many kids. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you can change this video, do whatever you want with it, I don't care, but that is the situation.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Are you happy for it to be used?
100%.
I'm a left-wing journalist, and I come to lots of protests like this to try and understand why people are actually...
As long as you put my point across and don't doctor it.
No, I'm not interested in... not interested in
cool.
gotcha editing or anything.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your situation. I wish that your anger and frustration was with people at governmental level rather than asylum seekers. Because
it's not at asylum seekers. It's not at asylum seekers at all. It is at them. It's at the authorities. It's at the official people. The official people are the ones that are letting them in. The official people are the ones that are giving them everything.
What council are you in?
Sadix Homes.
And who's in charge of that council though?
Don't know.
Don't know.
No. I've also contacted the local MP. The MP has got back to me recently just to get on.
What party is he from?
Pardon?
What party is he from?
I'm from Salford.
No, the MP. Do you know what party he's from?
Not sure.
No. Not sure. All right. Well,
Thank
I
you.
hope you get all, everything that you need for you and your family.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Politicians who get elected understand the arithmetic. So decade after decade, they tinker at the edges. They fuck about at the periphery of the problems. They announce housing targets. They promise planning reform. They commission reviews. And the fundamental problems is insufficient supply, inadequate affordability, poor tenant protections, and this remains largely unchanged. The new Renters' Rights Act represents the most significant reform to the England's rental market in a generation. It bans so-called no-fault evictions, where a landlord can remove a tenant without giving any real reason. These are real, meaningful changes for millions of renters. If implemented properly and executed in a way that benefits renters in the UK at the moment, this will make a genuine difference to people's security and quality of life. However, critics, including housing campaigners and economists, argue that these reforms, as welcome as they are, still don't address the fundamental problems and the structural issues. Britain simply does not build enough homes, and if these properties do not get built and are increasingly unaffordable to people who need them the most, the problem just spirals and escalates. Over the last decade, wages for many workers stagnated while rents, landlords, profits and property values surged. Housing became one of the biggest drivers of wealth inequality in Britain. If you already owned property, your wealth increased dramatically, often without doing anything at all. If you didn't own property, you faced rising rents, shrinking savings, and increasingly precarious living conditions. This isn't accidental, it is the predictable outcome of a system that treats housing primarily as a financial asset rather than a public good or a basic human necessity. And so we arrive at what it is for many people living in London right now. It's an uncomfortable truth. London today increasingly functions as two cities, existing side by side. One London is a playground and investment hub for global wealth, a city of offshore-owned mansions, dark apartment windows, and streets that function less like neighbourhoods and more like open-air storage for capital. The other side of London City is where ordinary people, nurses, teachers, drivers, artists, struggle to afford secure housing at all, where rough sleepers is visible in broad daylight and in the dead of night on the streets outside luxury developments, where home ownership feels generationally out of reach. The image of empty mansions in Kensington while rough sleepers camp nearby in Hyde Park has become one of the most powerful symbols of modern Britain, a country where housing is no longer just shelter but one of the clearest expressions of class, inequality, corruption and power. What would actually change this? Several things, but none of them are simple. More supply, and this is generally affordable housing, not the developer definition of affordable, which can still mean rents most nurses and teachers can't afford, built at scale in a place where people actually need to live. So one of the key arguments to this is more supply, so genuine affordable housing, not the developer definition of affordable, which can still mean rents that most nurses and teachers cannot afford, but at scale, in locations around city where people actually need to live and actually want to live. Transparency around overseas property ownership, knowing exactly who owns what, through what structure, would at a minimum make the scale of the problem visible. And looking at empty home levels, taxes on properties left vacant without any good reason already exist in limited forms in some areas of the UK. A robust national version could both generate revenues and create genuine incentives for properties to be used. And at a cultural and political level, we can think about housing in itself as an investment vehicle, but more as infrastructure, like roads and schools, like a functioning society requires. None of this is easy. All of it faces significant political resistance, but it's an alternative. Continuing to allow London to hollow itself out carries its own enormous costs. The story of the Bishop's Avenue is, in the end, a story about priorities, about what we've decided as a society to optimise for. We've built a system that is extraordinarily effective at making property valuable and extraordinarily bad at making some people have somewhere decent to live. Whether that changes and how fast depends on whether enough people understand the system well enough to demand something different. And I think that's where the knowledge and information gap exists, where the system can currently continue to exacerbate, where the problems become worse. This is what this channel is about. Well, it seems like it's becoming more and more about filling in the gaps, understanding the systems, following the money, and asking the questions that the people who benefit from the current arrangement would rather not see any significant pushback or significant opposition about. If this video has given you a clearer picture of what is happening in London's housing market, do share it with your friends, your family, your frenemy at work. This stuff only changes when more people know about it. I've put together this YouTube video so it is digestible in different parts throughout, from beginning to end, and in 6 distinctive parts. This is something that you would be able to go to whenever you need to in the description box below. Don't forget to like this video if you thought it was informative. Share it with anyone who you think would be interested, your friends, your family, your frenemy at work. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos, and smash the subscribe button if you would like to join this growing community of nearly 20,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. And apparently I think there is a hype button beneath this video. If there is a hype button, don't forget to hype this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'm publishing a new video as often as I can. It looks like as if it's every 4 weeks. I'm trying to increase this to every week. And I will be talking more about the system, money, and when I can be bothered, I'll be sharing some more violin-related YouTube videos and tutorials and posting them as frequently as I can. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later.